I'm going to make a yukata out of this stripy viscose fabric. I'm going to use my pattern, which you can get in the description below, and follow along with me. Let's make a beautiful yukata together. So it's for a man or a more mature woman. I got the fabric in Singapore and it is Japanese. Somewhere along here it says made in Japan. There we go. It's a viscose fabric with a blend. It's a blended viscose. I'm not really sure on exactly the composition because they didn't say it in the shop where I bought it from, but it's absolutely amazing. Look at that. It's so striking with that barcode stripe there, thin and thick going across, and it's going to make an amazing yukata just like this one. So this is made from Japanese fabric, but this was made using the tanmono, so the traditional standard width fabric to make a yukata. I'm going to be using my pattern that I created from making garments like this out of traditional Japanese fabric, but I've learnt over the years how to then make it out of regular fabric. This is 110 centimeters wide or 43 inches. So this is very regular fabric that you can get in nearly any fabric store you have, and I'm going to show you how to get this out of that. In order to make this garment, I've bought 4 meters of this fabric. That was all that was available in the store. So in my pattern, this is fabric B, 110 centimeters, 43 inches. It's the narrow gauge fabric if you go to a fabric store, and they usually do have a more intricate pattern, something a bit more beautiful. It's usually the more beautiful fabric that's in the narrow gauge. In this case, I'm going to make sleeves that go to 50 centimeters, so half a yard. So men's garments, men's kimono and yukata are made with a shorter sleeve, as are yukata and kimono for mature women. The longer the sleeve, the younger the lady usually. So from adolescence, a woman would wear really long sleeves, and then when she gets married, they get shorter, and as she grows older, they get shorter and shorter, to the point where they're basically at the same point as a men's. Men's yukata and kimono are made slightly differently. One, the sleeves are usually shorter than a lady's yukata or kimono, and two, they don't have the underarm, the hole under the underarm called miyatsuguchi, which is used so you can get in to the kimono while you're dressing and tie up the ties that are happening inside the kimono and shuffle everything about. Men's kimono and yukata are worn much simply with far less accessories, and so they don't need to get in and do all that. So here there's no gap underneath the sleeve, and also the sleeve is closed next to the body there. So that's the difference between men's and women's kimono and yukata. Basically there's a couple of other differences, but these are the main ones. This is how you identify whether the kimono or yukata is masculine or feminine, other than say the decoration and things like that. So this will show you how to make a yukata for a man out of 4 meters of fabric that is 110 centimeters wide or 43 inches wide. So the first thing I've done, I've washed it and I've pressed it, and it is a viscose blend, so it really doesn't re-crease. It's got a good weight to it, and I don't know if you can see. You can see here it's kind of a matte texture. It's not shiny whatsoever. It's got a crepe. It's a crepe basically. So that means that the yarn that made up the fabric is highly twisted, and it goes like this, and which means that it doesn't crease as much, because when a crease comes in, it gets sort of pulled back out by these twisted fibers. And it also means that the fabric looks really matte. So like a basic cotton, actually, like this cotton here. This is just Japanese cotton, and it's incredibly matte. So there's no sheen or shininess to it. They're really great to work with. And in Japan, traditionally, nearly all the silk kimono that you would see would be made with some kind of crepe, which is called chirimen. And it would be like this. So those really shiny, satiny kimonos that you might think of when you first imagine a Japanese garment, they were most often made for export, for trade with other countries in the late 19th century, and before that most people wore something much more subdued. Of course there were beautiful brocades and they used gold embroidery and everything, but the use of a satin for the whole garment was actually quite rare. Now what I need to do, if you'll see on the pattern, is fold this directly in half and find the halfway point. Because this fabric already has stripes, it means when it comes to cutting it, it makes it so much easier because you have a line to follow once you've found where you need to be. And this looks pretty even, so I'm guessing when I get to the halfway point, I'm gonna be halfway either in the middle of a stripe or on the other side. There you go. I'm exactly halfway down this stripe. So to be honest, I could press this and make the crease, or I could cut just down the middle of this center stripe. It's a great way to do it, to get that center point first, because I have that striped fabric. There is a definite center point right in the middle of that line that I'm cutting down. So there's less pressing needed. It makes it just easier for the precision, because I know if I continue down this line, I'm going to cut exactly halfway down my fabric. There we go. So I've got two 4-meter long strips of fabric, each with a selvage and each with a raw edge. And what I need to do now is find 1/3 of each. So I'm going to measure across and find what the hole is, then find out what 1/3 of that is, and then I'm going to cut that off. So it'll be somewhere around here. And what that's going to do is, if you see this gives me my body and sleeve pieces and the width that they'll be. So they're like that wide. And then it'll also, if you see the other side, can you see that? Yeah, see how it's a sublimated fabric, so you can see there's a definite right and wrong side to it. And on this side, that's going to make up the collar and these front overlaps. So the okumi, they're called as well. So this is where a little bit of maths comes in. But again, once I find that, because of this beautiful stripe, I'm going to be able to find out where that mark is and then follow that line. If you're not confident with your cutting and you don't think you can cut a straight line like that for 4 meters, so 4 yards, then press it, put it in maybe with a pen. And of course, if you have a plain fabric or something that doesn't need to be so straight, you can fold this up. If I was you, I would fold it in half and then fold it in half again, and then find that measurement and then cut through all 4 layers at once. And it just means instead of cutting 4 yards, you're cutting 1, or instead of cutting 4 meters, you're cutting 1. That makes it a bit easier, but I don't mind cutting. I've got beautiful scissors and some nice tables to cut on, so I don't mind going all the way through. So I'm going to do that now. I measured in, and these are 56 centimeters or 22 inches across. So that means that the fabric was 44 inches wide or 112 centimeters. Of course, when you buy it and it says 110, it usually doesn't count the selvages, and they're about 1 centimeter each. So it all makes sense. So 1/3 of that is around 18 centimeters. And what I did is I found where 18 centimeters was, and it was just about, do you see this little clip that I've made there? It was just around this area. So what I did is I rounded it to the nearest stripe. That's going to make it easier to cut, and that's also going to make it more aesthetically pleasing when you put it together, because it's going to go straight down a stripe. And I did that on the other side as well. So for the imperial measurements, this was 22 inches once it was cut in half, and 1/3 of that is about 7 inches. So I measured into around 7 inches to that stripe, which means that the last piece is going to be 15 inches wide, which, if you've seen anything else I've talked about, the tan mono is between 14 and 16 inches wide all the time. That's what all kimono and yukata are made out of in Japan. That's what this was made out of as well. That kind of measurement, that width, is that uniform width that they use throughout the whole of Japan. And then to fit it to someone, you simply adjust the seam allowances. And it all makes sense once you start putting it together. And it's explained in detail in my pattern. I'm going to go through this rather fast, but if you really want an in-depth look at how to make every single step of your yukata or your kimono, don't forget the full course is available in a playlist linked down below on this YouTube channel. So it's all free. There's over 3 hours worth of content cut up into 18, I think, or 19 videos explaining every single step. So I take you through a bit of a chat about the kimono, what we're making, and then I talk about fabric selection, how we cut it, the equipment you need, all the stuff you need to do, and then we go through every single step of making a kimono or a yukata, just like this one, just like the one behind me, and just like the one I'm going to make today. It teaches you how to measure yourself to make your kimono or yukata. It shows you how you can adjust that yourself as well. So it gives you the tools you need to make this over and over again, and for whomever you need to make it for, so you can adjust the pattern so easily. It really is a cool pattern. I made it myself from my extensive research into kimono and yukata and my experience of making them over the years, making lots and lots of garments over the years. And I was able to work out how to put that to regular fabric rather than traditional Japanese fabric, and then how to make it really nice and simple so you can run it through a machine and you can have a garment done in the afternoon. It really is that simple. One of the best things about the pattern is that there are no paper patterns. There's no paper around me here. It's all about measurements. They are defined, easy to remember measurements. They're all written down, and it's all straight pattern pieces. So you don't need to be tracing anything out. You just need your ruler and your chalk and some scissors and an iron, and you'll be fine. You'll make the whole pattern. And in another video, which I might link to up along here somewhere, I cut all the pattern pieces for yukata in, I think it was under 10 minutes, maybe 5, because I used some cotton and I could just tear through. So it's such a simple pattern that you can literally tear your fabric apart, if it's tearable, if you're able to tear it, and have your pattern done in a matter of minutes. So I'm going to go on and cut these narrow strips now. I'm going to follow that lovely line down there, and because this fabric was evenly balanced, the stripes are evenly distributed across the fabric, I knew that the exact same point on the other piece of fabric, on this one, would be that mark, that 18 centimeters, 7-inch mark. And it turned out it was. I measured it again. You always measure again, don't just assume. But I did measure again, and it was in the same point, you know, with a bit of give. But I moved it to that little point just on that stripe. So I'm going to go and cut that now in the same way that I cut it in half. And then we'll talk about dividing the part with the selvage on it into your sleeves and body. There we go, bit of cutting, and I have 2 wide pieces like this, and so should you have 2 wide pieces. Both of them have a selvage on each side and a raw edge in the center, and they're about 15 inches or around 38 centimeters, something like that, around 40 centimeters. That's those 2, and then I have 2 really long thin strips, no selvage, just raw edges. They go on for meters and meters and meters. So I have 2 of them and 2 of them, and from these we're going to get our pattern pieces. So the first ones I'm going to focus on are the body pieces. So the body pieces and the sleeves are all in these pieces. There's 2 strips that are wide that I've just talked about. On this yukata, I'm making the sleeves to be 50 centimeters hanging from the wrist, which means the piece for each sleeve, the pattern piece, needs to be about a meter. So when you seam it, it'll be a little less than 50 centimeters up and over down here. But what I'm going to take from the top of the fabric is exactly 1 meter. So it's around about a yard. Yards are a bit different, but I've bought this in meters, and so I'm taking off a meter of fabric, which is about a yard. I think it's 1.1 or 1.2 yards, and that will make a beautiful sleeve that will hang a bit like this. Now, one great thing is these tables I have are exactly 1 meter across. So I'm going to use them for my measurements. I'm going to, if you see here, if I pull this here and that's all lovely and straight, down there, that's exactly 1 meter. So I'm going to score that and take that off, and then I've got my sleeves and my body pieces done. I've now separated the bodies from the sleeves, and as it says in the pattern, the first thing we need to do is grab them, find their exact halfway point. That's literally by just folding them in half. And I need to press that in. And these are the sodayama and katayama. So on your sleeve, this is known as the sodayama. It literally means the sleeve mountain. It's a point here, you can sort of see it on my yukata, that goes from the top of the cuff, so the halfway point here, it goes up, and it's where your sleeve joins the body at the katayama, which means shoulder mountain. So your sleeve mountain meets the shoulder mountain at the shoulder, and then that goes up into the center back neck. And it is where we measure everything from. So it's really important that this is pressed in again. If you lose it, you press it again and you mark it, and we make sure that we always know where this is, because this is a very important part of the pattern. So it's now time to use the smaller strips, the narrower strips, and make the half-width pieces, the okumis and the collar and the sashes. So usually you do them 2 inches or 5 centimeters less than your shoulder to hem measurement. So in this case, the shoulder to hem measurement would be 150 centimeters or 60 inches, which would make the okumi 145 centimeters or 58 inches. I'm going to cut 1 okumi, and I'm going to use that okumi to find the second one by just folding it over or lining it up rather than doing more measurements. So I've just cut the 2 front extensions, and what was left over is about 1 meter 10, just over a yard, about 43 inches of fabric. Now, I can use that for the tomo eri. That is, can you see it on here? It's the second collar. It's called the collar's friend. It's an over collar. So the collar extends from down here all the way up and around and down to the other side. And then the over collar is exactly half the length. And it goes from here and up and around. And the point of this, it's called the collar's friend, because once it gets soiled or it gets rubbed and frayed, you take it off, you don't throw it away, you then put it under the actual collar and give it another life, and it bulks out the collar up around the neck. So because this is such a high use area, it's a good place to put a sort of spare tire of the kimono or the yukata. So you'll see them often, and it often confuses people, this little seam that goes across here, but it's not a seam, it's what is that? And that's because there's a second layer that's set on top of it and all the way around, but only halfway. So I've got enough here to make the tomo eri, and for my second one, all I need to do is take out the collar, which is 180 centimeters, and I still have a little bit left over to make a sash. It will be 2 meters, which is enough. Like, I'm not slim, so a 2 meter sash, this is 1.5 meters. This will tie and it will be lovely. So first thing I'm going to do is cut the tomo eri, the 90 centimeters, 35.5 inches, because once I've got that, I can then find the collar without having to measure out the collar, because I use the tomo eri to measure the collar. Because the tomo eri, the over collar, is half the length of the full collar. I take the over collar, put it onto the full collar. Then I found the center point, which you need anyway. You need to know your center points. And then I just double that. It's really simple, and it means that everything again has been measured against each other, and they all sort of match up together. So I'm going to measure this for 90 centimeters. So do you see what I'm doing here? I've laid down that over collar right on top of the second long strip of fabric, and I'm marking in here. And there's two reasons that this is fantastic to mark in. That is the exact center of the full collar. So I now know where that is. That's brilliant, because you need to find that as soon as you've finished making this pattern piece. First thing you do is fold this in half and find that half width piece, the halfway point of the collar. And the second thing is that is the halfway point. And so I just line the over collar up with that again, sit it down, and that helps me find the full point, which I'll cut now using this as a tracing template. So with this fabric, while there is a little bit more measurement, you can use your pieces as tracing. And there I have my over collar and my collar. It's exactly double. And when we attach this, the over collar is first sewn onto the collar in a special method, and then they'll go around the neck. So that's lovely. There's the collar's done. I'll press the exact halfway point of them. And while my iron heats up, I'll talk about this. This is now your sash. And this will be turned into the sash. It's one of the first things we do because you want to get it out of the way. It's a very simple process. We're literally running around the outside, leaving a space in the middle, and then we turn the sash through, and then we sew up that space. You're making a tube of fabric. My pattern pieces, and if you're following along, hopefully your pattern pieces are now all cut. I have 2 front overlaps, 2 okumi. There they are, absolutely beautiful half width pieces, and I shall fold them up and put them there. I have 2 parts to a collar, over collar and under collar. I have 2 sleeves and 2 body pieces. There are 8 pieces that make up a kimono or a yukata. That is them. I also have the fabric to make my sash in the self fabric. So I have that, and I have, this is my leftovers from the garment. So I bought 4 meters of fabric. I'm going to make a garment, and this is what is scrap. But there is our pattern, all cut, all ready to go. So now we move on to raw edge management. It's time to turn some raw edges. So here I have a body piece. It's 3 meters long. If I throw it over myself, it will reach all the way down to the hem, to the floor, where my feet are down there. And as we remember, I'm keeping this selvage the way it is. Now, you might not want to do that. I've talked about this. You can easily remove that, and all we're doing is turning the raw edge like that. So we go, but I'm not going to. I'm going to keep it because I think it's rather lovely, and also it's not that bad that I would want to remove it. It's more about the fact that I would have to do all the work if I did remove it. So it's taking some work away. But what I am doing is the other raw edge. You can see it like here. So what I'm going to do is fold it once and press that in at 1/2 centimeter. So that's 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to fold it again at 1 centimeter, which is about there. And then I'm going to sew that down, and I'll sew it just along the edge, along there. And then that makes this completely encased, and means that when you're pressing your seams, you press your seams open. There's no chance of any of this, the cut work coming through. Now, I do it twice, that's best practice. You can overlock this and it'll be absolutely perfect, and then you just press your seams open. You could turn it once, and this is a technique you use if you're trying to make a garment that's a bit bigger. It gives you more fabric in your seam allowance, so it means you can make smaller seams, if you know what I mean. There's more to play with, so you can make the garment a little bit bigger by only turning it once. So if you can turn it by 5 mil, 1/4 of an inch, you can turn it by 1 centimeter, which is 1/2 an inch, and just sew down that. Just literally sew down that, because this is the seam allowance. This isn't seen on the outside of the garment, it's on the inside of the garment, and on the inside of the garment it's pressed open, so you don't see it anyway. But it's all about best practices, and best practices is to completely encase them. So you could bind the seams if you're really adept. Some people are really good at using binding, bias binding, or just any kind of binding tape, and they're really good at just running that through the machine, getting it absolutely accurate. If you're good at that, do that. That's fantastic, and it looks really nice as well. But we're just trying to encase these raw edges in any way you want. But the thing to do is to do them now, so that you can just go through your seams later. We don't finish the seams after we sew them. We finish them before, then we sew the seams, press them, and they're done. So it makes it feel really fast once you start sewing, because there isn't all this seam finishing that's happening. You're just putting the garment together. It's really good. It's quite exciting. When it comes to the front extensions, they are to be 15 centimeters or 6 inches once seamed. So you want to make sure that often you'll just do a smaller turn. So I do half a centimeter or a 1/4 inch, and I do a 1/4 inch again. And that way I have room to move when I'm putting in a seam allowance if I need to get the front extension a little bit wider or narrower and just get it to that 6 inches. It's okay if it's 5.5 inches or if it's 6.5 inches, but you want to get it somewhere around that point. That's the sort of uniform point for the front extensions. So by making your turns on the front extensions a little bit smaller, it means you've got some more leeway. And then when it comes to seaming, it's quite easy. And one side of this is the front opening, so we can treat that however we want. If you've got lots of room on these, then you can do big ones like we just did. Otherwise, try and do smaller ones. Attaching the overcollar to the undercollar. Take the overcollar, found at center point, and what you have to do now is put in seam allowances at its end, and they're 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch. So just get this nice and straight, turn this back 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter, and then press in seam allowance. I have my collar here on my pressing mat. Because this fabric is quite slippy on the melamine tables, it's actually easier to sort of keep it in place if I put it onto this mat first. And then I use this underneath it. It doesn't have to be this. This is a little ironing, a sort of pressing guide. Well, it's actually a cutting guide and a measuring thing. It said it was iron safe, but it wasn't. So if you see these on certain online stores, that's what happened when I tried to press using it. Not pressable. But they're very useful. They've got great little curves on them, so if you're making curved corners on your kimono sleeves or yukata sleeves, fantastic for that. Great little measuring tools. Something any quilter, and a lot of you will know about quilting out there, any quilter will be familiar with a little ruler like this. I'm using it to make this pinnable. So I've got it on top of a pressing mat. So obviously if I try to pin through, I could pin through all of them and pin onto the pressing mat. And what I've got here is I have the overcollar sat, and I'll just check that this is nice and straight again. This is very slippy fabric and it moves on every axis. So once you get it into a position, you want to keep it there, hence the mat. So I've got my collar, and then this is my overcollar, and I'm putting this on exactly at their halfway points, and they match completely because they're cut from the same part of the fabric, so their stripes match up exactly as well. And then I'm going to come in and pin the centers together, and from there we can work out how to then attach the collar, the overcollar, down here to the collar. But so the first thing I'm going to do is pin down these pressed lines and now I can see through this and I can make sure that this is exactly lined up. So the center point of the overcollar and regular collar are now pinned in the center down here. There's a crease there that we've put in during pressing when we've been making the pattern pieces. So I'm going to pull this along, and then what I'm trying to do here is find out where this ends once that little seam allowance that we folded into it comes to. Because this is how it's going to end. Do you see that there? It will, oh, that one didn't fold under there. So what I mean is jumpy fabric. Remember, you can omit this. If your fabric is not playing the game, then you can omit this altogether and just carry on with a regular collar. That's fine. But it should end up like that. Like on mine here. Where is it? Here. So I'm trying to find this point and I'm going to chalk it in, because then what happens is I flip the whole thing back and sew it down. So we're finding where exactly on this part is, and the best way to do that is with a bit of chalk. So it's quite faint, but I've marked it in there, and then what I'll do is straighten it up with the ruler, and then that gives me a line, not to sew down, but I'll show you what I'll do now, and then you'll see it once I'm sewing it, is you bring this to that line and then you bring all of it forward. Now remember, you've pinned in the center here so you can move this about, and then we're pinning right sides together using that line that we just drew to put the edge of the seam allowance onto it. Then you pin it down in this place and we sew down halfway across the seam allowance. You don't sew right on the seam allowance because we want to have just that little bit of a turnover. So the seam is where the two knuckles here are meeting, and you want it to be pressed. So it's not pressed flat like that, it's pressed so there's a little overlap. And it doesn't look like a seam then, it just looks like it's folded on top of the piece and you can't see what's going on underneath. I'm going to press this and get those beautiful little turnover seams done where you just have that little overlap. And then what I'll do is I'll then sew a big stay stitch straight down either side. So that doesn't have to be pretty or great, and you use a really long stitch if you want, because what you're doing is just holding the two pieces in place. So when it comes to attaching it to the actual garment, attaching the collar, it does it together. So it's not about a real precision stitch here. What you're doing is keeping these two pieces together so that they'll go onto the garment nicely. This is all part of the collar prep. So now what I'm going to do is just tamp down the edge where I've put that stay stitch in. You see it's a big stitch, and of course a big stitch tends to gather things a bit more, but you can just press that straight out. So I'm just going to give that a big press now. All right, that's all nice and pressed. Now it's time to press the seam allowance of the collar. I'm going to start on this side. So this is going to go on the outside of the garment. So this is the first part that I will sew. And the reason I'm doing that is because it is black and I'm using black thread. You can see there's black thread along here. And because this isn't white, I have white thread, but this is actually off-white. So the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to fold this up. This will be the part that goes on first, the seam allowance that goes on first. And when the collar goes onto the garment, that will be the inside and this will be the outside. So one, it's got a better stripe for the outside. You see this little white bit that goes around the neck, then you've got black, and here will be black. And because I'm going to sew through this to attach the second seam allowance, I can use black and it'll look really lovely and neat in there. And if there are any discrepancies, it will happen on the inside where it's white. So it'll be white against black, but it'll be on the inside. So if anything snakes a bit, it's okay. It's not on the outside of the garment. That's why I am doing it in this way. And in order to do it in this way, to make it the best possible, you lift the first seam allowance first. So the one that you're going to put onto the garment first, the outside of the garment, I like to press that first and then use that as a guide for the other seam allowance. So I'll press along here And then I'll bring it over and I'll show you how I do it. It's a good way to make sure you get something nice and straight. Now, I say to do 1 centimetre or 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've got a really good line here and I'm going to follow that. It's, I think, just under 1 centimetre or just under 1/2 inch, but I would prefer to use the line as my guide. I have a line to follow and it will appear straighter once the garment's made if I use that line. First seam allowance is turned up, that's all lovely and dandy. Now what I'm going to do is use this to make the second seam allowance nice and straight. So in order to do that, I'm going to turn it upside down. So you can see here, there's that pressed seam allowance there. So you see here, I've brought it all down and I've got my 1/2 inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance following underneath. There's the seam allowance turned under on the first side, and this one I'm going to go through and press up, but I'm using this as my template. So the first seam allowance is my template. I'm going to press it over like this. So what that does is ensures that you have a straighter seam allowance and that it's even, because that pressed line is going to be at the first pressed line. And as you're going along, you're also pressing the top along here, and this is the peak of the collar, so the fold of the collar as it turns over at the neck. Let me show you what we're doing. So you see here, I've pressed it all up, and you can see that it's been using this as the template. And now if I press it, if I put it under, it means we've got a lovely line, and you see that there's just about 1 millimetre, so less than 1/8 of an inch underlap there for when we're sewing from this side. There you go. So you can see what I've done. I've pressed the top and I've pressed the bottom, and the two of them will now line up beautifully. And you can see here, when I sew through this with the black thread from the outside of the garment, it's going to catch this underlap there and make sure that we don't miss any of the collar when we're putting it on. The last thing to do before we do our garment construction, we're actually putting together the garment, is you bring the collars together like this at their end, and we sew with 1/2 inch seam allowance from the seam allowance line, this fold line here, up to here. So we're just closing it but leaving the seam allowances free. So when we did our measurements earlier, we talked a lot about the width of these pieces, the body pieces and the sleeve pieces. And there's a lot of talk about it in the pattern as well. And there's a lot of talk, I've done a couple of videos on the YouTube channel about it and throughout the course. There's lots of talk about how to fit these. Now, unless you're making an extra large one, or you're trying to make something extra small, you don't have to be that fastidious about your measurements. You can fit one garment to a lot of people within size ranges. So what I do is I always turn it by 1/2 centimetre and then 1 centimetre, like we did earlier with these raw edge managements, which is 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch respectively. Then what I do is I come in and this is how I always do my kimonos and yukatas. I sew from this line, see here? So the inside of that raw edge management, not the actual outside of the garment, because I find it easier to look at this line here and follow that with my needle. And I go in 1/2 centimetre, so 1/4 inch from that. Now, you can get your measurements right and do your seam exactly how you want, but this fits me. I have a 47 centimetre circumference at my widest point, which is 120 centimetres or 4 feet. And this will fit me, but it also fits people far smaller than me and actually fits people larger than me. Doing it in this exact method, it's very easy to remember and it's great to do the same thing over and over again. So you don't have to worry too much about getting the circumference measurements just right, because this is an anti-fit garment that you wrap around your body and tie up. We're not making a bodycon dress, we're making a yukata or a kimono or a robe, depending what you're making. It doesn't need to fit you perfectly, it just needs to go around you. That's all good. But doing it around here to 1/2 centimeter or 1 centimeter, so 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch respectively, that's gonna make a kimono or yukata that will fit a lot of people. So I'm just letting you off where we've done the collar. That's a very intricate part of making the kimono or yukata, and we're going to attach it in a couple of steps, and that's quite, you have to be really precise there. But I'm telling you right now, you don't have to be as precise about the fitting because we wrap this garment around ourselves, so it's going to fit a lot of people no matter what you do. So don't get disheartened. Save all your worry for attaching the collar. It's not that bad, I promise. I'm pressing this seam open. Remember, you can also sew this seam with a French seam, you can overlock it, all that stuff. We talked about that earlier, but I like to sew them with a lovely open seam. I think they're so beautiful when you do it this way. We've done our centre back seam, and before we attach the front extensions, I always say to do this before the next step. So here you see a beautiful katayama, and there is the centre back seam. Pressed open all the way up until that lovely little centre back neck, which is there. So I'll put a graphic. This comes, boom, directly from the pattern. You'll see it, go and buy the pattern. It's down in the description below. Get it and sew along with us. But here is really the only part that you can print out if you want, but you really don't have to. I'm going to show you how to measure this and draw this in. And it's actually harder to go and print it and then do it. It's much easier to make a few calculations and then move on. So we need to come, and I'm going to use, actually, I often use a squaring ruler and stuff, but this is to show you that you don't have to if you don't have that. So we go 4 inches from the centre back neck, either way along the katayama. That is where we're going to slash in, but we don't do it yet. I'll tell you when you slash. What we're doing now is marking the neck, and we'll do all the slashing next, but we're marking it while we've got a flat lay of the land. Then we'll put on some front extensions, and then we'll get ready to attach the collar. But we're going to mark it now. So get your lovely katayama nice and straight and go 10 centimeters or 4 inches along there on one side and do it on the other. 10 centimeters, in fact I'll turn it over for you, which is 4 inches. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, but I will do it in centimeters because they are slightly different, aren't they, every time. So 10 centimeters and 10 centimeters. There we go. From each of them we need to go 5 centimeters or 2 inches down. So what I do is I do it from the center back neck first, and I find that 5 centimeters spot just there, which is 2 centimeters, almost exactly. In fact, I think it is exact. And then I do the same from these, and I just go straight back. Now this is where a little squaring off ruler might help, but you do not need one. I'm showing you right now, that is not essential. Granted, I do have lines on here that I can follow, but you don't need it. So I've got these marks in here, and use something that can be sort of removed from your fabric. You see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 in the center. And this box that we've got is where your collar is going to travel, but we need to circle it off. So what you've got here, just look at them as halves. So we've got our lovely marks here, 5 centimeters up, 10 centimeters across, 2 centimeters up, 4 centimeters across. Get something round. I'm using a teacup. Very simple teacup that I have washed. What I'm doing here is demonstrating that you don't need to print something off. You don't need fancy rulers with curves on them, although they are fantastic. So if you have that, use that. But what I use is just a cup usually. And so what I'm doing here is, if you can see, that's actually touching that line. Only just touching that line, and it's just touching this. So if you actually draw a rectangle, what we're doing is just connecting that curve naturally with this circle. So what I do is I come in at its highest point where it's touching that line and just scribe around. and only faintly, because you don't want to really overmark your fabric. Now, can you see that? Yeah, there we go. And that's put in, that's the path of the collar. I'll do it the other side. So you can use like your measuring tape, but also if you can eyeball it, then eyeball it. This little line here, so you want to know where that line is and where this intercepts with it once it's touching the other side. And again, come in and just scribe it in there. Then go straight across the middle. And that is how we mark the path of the collar. So, you are able to print this out, obviously, on a piece of paper and then transfer it. But I just wanted to show you that you don't have to. It is so simple. I've got a teacup and I've got a piece of chalk and a ruler. So I'm going to put the graphic up again so you can see what I've done. I've come across 10 centimeters, 4 inches, 10 centimeters, 4 inches. I've gone up 5 centimeters, 2 inches. I've done the same from each of the 10 centimeter or 4 inch marks. And then I've found that rectangle and then curved it. That's it. Now we move on to adding the front extensions. Don't do anything more with this until we're finished with them. Don't slash, don't cut, don't anything. In the pattern, in this diagram, it says cut and slash and all those things. Leave that until the next couple of steps. Otherwise, you can do it now, but it means you'll just have slashes that will rip and they will, like this fabric, they will fray horrendously. So it's nice to have everything neat for as long as possible. We're now ready to attach the front overlaps, the okumi as they're known. And if, like me, you have a pattern and it's mirrored, so I cut these from the middle of the fabric, thus they are a pair. Remember you have to attach them as a pair. So I'll pin these into place. Yeah, you're doing right sides together and then you're pressing them open. Make sure you line up your hem and work up from there. And that will make a much easier garment to work with. Your front extensions are now attached. They are down here. This is the front of the garment. Here is the katayama, the shoulder mountain, and here is where the collar will be attached, the path of the collar. So that's the back of the garment heading down that way. Now it is time to slash in to your neckline. And the reason to do this is to create ease so we can then stretch it all out and then get the collar and sew it on to this path that goes, in fact, so there's the front extension coming out here. Your collar is going to go around the collar's path up here and all the way down and follow on down. So it's better if we can go all the way around like this, and to do that, slashing into here helps. Now, in Japan, traditionally, you always slash into this part of the katayama along this shoulder line. Now, traditionally in Japan, you would slash in to these parts here, and then what they do, because they use silk or cotton or linen, sometimes flax, rami and hemp fabrics, which can be stretched quite easily using heat and moisture. So they would apply moisture, then they would apply heat, and while they apply heat, they would stretch this out to create the ease. So just this little part here, this semicircle, they would stretch it like this way. So it sort of straightens it all up to then go around. And then also in Japan, they're always sewn by hand. So when you're hand sewing, if you've hand sewn before, going around a curve, you've got it sort of over your hand like that and you're sewing across. It's a lot easier actually than doing it under the machine. And sometimes I actually hand sew these because I find it easier than machine sewing. But we're not doing that today. What we're doing is machine sewing, and I'm showing you how to get around here with a machine. And the easiest way to do that is to cut into this semicircle. So again, there's the graphic, and you can see the slash lines that are coming around. You don't have to do them exactly as it says on this graphic. You are slashing in to just before the line, and that's so we can turn this whole thing out. So I'm going to slash in. First thing you do is you come across 10 centimeters here and 10 centimeters there, the 4-inch cuts that we did earlier, and it's right along that katayama, the shoulder line. And you see why I'm doing it now. We've just put on these. If we had went to go and put these on next, we'd be pulling this, and you would have to put a stabilization stitch in there, maybe even along here, and it would just pull and fray the whole time. Now I'm going to cut this, and then we're going to apply the collar. So this is going to be fresh, and it's not going to be as frayed as it would be. There is the path of the collar, and we can now first pin it in place, but then sew it. I come in just a sort of couple of mil, so an eighth of an inch, less than an eighth of an inch beyond that line that I've made, and that's simply so I don't have to worry about it. It's within the seam allowance. It's sewn across, and you don't have to think about it again. And we start to pin. So I said we work down both sides before, and you do, but you certainly pin the center back neck into place on both sides. So I always do that to start. We go around, and what you're doing is you're just getting this to go around here. Once you get to this point, we travel off on a lovely little straight diagonal. It's about getting this curve into the fabric, this curve into your collar. You see I made it to the edge there of the marks. So from there we go straight down. Everything's been pinned, and I'm now ready to sew. I'm going to sew, looking at these, you can see the fold mark here. Do you see there's a fold line? Can you see that? Yeah, you can. So I'm going to sew down just beyond where I did that stay stitch, within that fold mark, so there's that little crease, so we can have that fold over once again. It gives you the room if you want to pull back and do an edge stitch on your second pass when you close the collar. And it's always just good practice to sew a little bit within that fold, just to give yourself some room. There is a video, and it's in the description below, that you can go and see, that I've made that is dedicated solely to this process. And it's part of the full course that's there as well, that goes into detail for everything, but especially this. So head there if you really want to see in detail, but I'll just give you a quick overview of what I'm going to do here. So you can see we've got the first pass done. What happens now is I fold these in, the extra parts that we passed over. So this is part of the front overlap here. That gets folded within the collar. See where we've got the half the collar there? These get folded in, and they actually bulk out and line the collar for you. So I always do this. It's brilliant, and there's a great way of folding it in, and it's in lots of detail in that other video I showed you. But what you end up with is this. And then what I do is I pin this down this side. So I'll put pins in to place the second pass, or the inside of the collar, down, but I'm going to be sewing from the other side. So I put the pins in to put it where it should be, then I turn it over, then I pin it from the side that I'll be sewing it in, and once I've done that, I take out the pins from the other side. And this is all about making sure that we get a nice even distribution of the collar, so when we sew it, we're catching the collar on the inside, and we're catching it at the right spot, rather than sort of deviating off and leaving holes in the collar seam. So the collar is attached. Well done, fantastic. We made it through. It's always a triumph once you get to the other side of that part of this project. It all gets very easy now. We are just basically doing straight sewing along straight seams and putting the rest of it together. The last two pieces that need to be added into the garment are the sleeves, and that's what we're going to do now. So in the PDF, you have a little sort of chart that shows you how we mark the sleeves. Here we go. You can see here, can you see it? Yes, you can see here, this is the katayama coming out of one side. This is a fantastic example as well of how the katayama is so important. You can see it along here Let me get a ruler so I can point it out a bit better. You can see that's the katayama along there, and then 5 inches, 2 centimeters below it, the new centre back neck where the collar now finishes. So that is why it's so important to put this in, because so many times when I first started making these, I would put the collar on and I'd be all excited and I'd go, right, I need to find the center point and put my sleeves on. And so I would find this point, the center back neck, thinking, well, that's where the shoulder emanates from. Come here. And I would end up with a 5 centimeter, a 2-inch discrepancy when the hems come together, when I do the side seam. And so I was always forever chopping hems away and stuff until I learnt what I was doing wrong, understood what I was doing wrong, and then changed my workflow. So I now know that I'm always putting these two in and keeping those creases there. And same with the sleeves. These have been pressed a couple of times, haven't they, throughout our process, to make sure that there is that lovely crease there at the sodayama. And it just makes it so easy, because now I know I line this up. And I haven't done my measurements yet, but I will. And I just have got my center point all ready. And then I make my little marks on here, and then it's as easy as sewing along there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll put on the screen. This comes in the pattern, which you can get in the description below. But on the screen here shows you the mock-up. We're making a garment with sleeves about this long. So this is another one of mine yukatas that I've made, and it has no Miyatsuguchi. There is a side seam that comes up to here, and then this is closed next to the body. This is why I wore this, and it's made exactly with this pattern as well. So this is to make a masculine garment, and that just means that it's sewn up to the point where we sew the side seam up to the point where the sleeve joins the body instead of leaving the gap. And I say we sew all the way up until the join with the body. We don't do all the way up. I'm going to talk about that a lot more when we get under the machine. But I'll just say that we're not sewing all the way right up and then going around and then back down, because that creates a lot of bulk. So I'm going to show you how to ease the bulk out of that part and not get, if you do that, you get a lot of pulling through here that looks a bit like that. Do you see it's pulling down into this corner here? The way that we do it here will alleviate that stress and make it a much easier garment to sew and wear. So first we'll put in some marks, and that is 30 centimeters, 12 inches down from the katayama and sodayama on both the sleeve and the garment, each way. So one goes this way from this center point. You can see the line there, can't you? One goes 30 centimeters down here, another mark 30 centimeters down here, and that is the seam. And we sew all the way along and do that seam. Your sleeves are attached. This is fantastic. Your entire garment now exists as one piece. All the pattern pieces are together, and we are very much on the home stretch. What we now need to do is the side seam. Very simple. We're gonna sew all the way up. Now, I say all the way up, we don't go all the way up, but we are leaving a little gap, about 1 centimeter. So we're gonna sew up. There you go, there's my sleeves are in there, and that's exactly where they come to. I'll pull them up like this. So there's the sleeve, you can see it's upside down, and here's the body, and then here starts the side seam, and I've got a pin there to tell me exactly where it is. And so I'm going to sew, and I'm only going to sew to about here. So half an inch, 1 centimeter from that point. So you can see there, I've left about 1 centimeter, half an inch between the two seams to meet up. That way it won't bunch so much here and create as much bulk, but also it doesn't create an opening. It's just a little bit of give, so both of them are nice and comfortable. And I'll clip these little ends away from the sewing. Do you see? And on the other side it's the same there as well. First, it's wrong sides together when you start a French seam. along the bottom of the sleeve, and then you trim and then sew right sides together. And then the size of those seams is up to you. You can make these quite wide, and it makes making the French seam quite easy because the seams are wider. So the wider you make the seams, the better. And we're now closing the rest of the sleeve off. So this is a masculine garment. I'm going to close, if we have a look at the sleeve, here it is, it's inside out. Here is the seam where the sleeve meets the body and then goes on to the side seam down here. Now, on a feminine garment, you would leave this open. On a masculine garment, you close it. So I'm gonna run a seam from the French seam there up to the side seam, and like we did before with the side seam, I'm gonna leave a nice little centimetre gap there. So at that seam junction, we don't have a lot of bulk. And then the side seam presses back like that, so that will sit nicely. But I sew from there, up along here. And I use this as my gauge, the side seam. I use the seam to the body, to the sleeve, as my gauge of where I'm sewing. And I actually, when I was pressing, I pressed that in, so it does show me a little line that I can follow. But I know where that is using my sewing machine, so I'll do that. Afterwards, I then close the front, and this is one more measurement. We do 8 inches from the sodayama down on each side to make the sleeve opening, the cuff. So we sew up from the French seam along here to 8 inches or 20 centimeters, and you can make it wider if you want. 25 centimeters is great, which is 10 inches. And you make that there, and then afterwards we turn this out like that, and we sew this cuff down. It's now just time to lift the hem. Well, I'm going to do a double turned hem, and in this case I just tried on the garment, the yukata, and I don't actually want to take too much length from it. It's sits right lower than this one, so it sits down about there. If I just took a small hem, this one has a very small hem, so you can see there it's about 1.5 centimeters, just over sort of 1/2 inch. And in the pattern we talk about doing 1 centimeter and then 5 centimeters. So you get this beautiful deep hem all the way along. But in this case, I want to make it shorter because I want to make the hem narrower because I want to make the garment longer. And if I want to make the garment shorter, I'd make the hem deeper. So this is where you can really play around with the height. And if you're just sort of trying to take 1 inch or 2 off because of your own height or the length of the fabric you have, this is where you can do all that. If you're trying to make something knee length or sort of waist length or something, you do that in the cutting stage. But this is where you make the changes for a difference between someone who's 6 foot and someone who's 5'7". This is where you do it. It's really very simple, and we just turn up the hem to that specification. So there we go, a beautiful Japanese yukata made out of Japanese viscose fabric. Absolutely beautiful with that black and white barcode stripe through it. I think it looks fantastic. This is it on the mannequin. It's a feminine mannequin, and I'm showing you how it looks on that, and it's a masculine garment because we closed the Miyatsu Gucci and we've made it with a shorter sleeve. I'm going to put it on myself next, but I thought I'd just show you here so you can see how lovely it is. Look at how that sleeve lines up with the body, so you can't even see where the joint is because the lines have lined up in just the right way. And using a lined fabric is fantastic for things like that. You just get those guides that you don't get with other fabrics as you're sewing. So I'm going to put this on now because this is my yukata that I made for myself, and I'll show you how it looks. And here it is on me. So you can see here we've got the shorter sleeves. I'll come in a bit, but this is how long I've made it. So I've done a small hem so it fits, there we go, right down to the floor. You can see as I turn around, but oh, it's comfortable. Do you know, I've talked about this being viscose the whole time. It's definitely got some cotton woven through because it is so comfortable, so light. So you can see how sort of, there we go, how light the fabric is, and it feels amazing. So it was a devil to sew. It really was tough to sew because that viscose, even though it's non-stretch, it still moves in every which way because of the crepe as well. And it's got a satin back. So a lot of crepes have, let me see, I don't know if you saw it throughout, but slightly sheeny satin back crepe. It's very, 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 very normal to have a crepe made like that. But it's fantastic and it looks great as well. Look at that barcode. Something that you would have seen out of a Edo period woodblock print, definitely these stripes. And so I'm trying to represent that and get something really dynamic, that black and white. It looks fantastic. I'm really happy with it. Happy with the fit. As you can see, there's a lot of room. That's how I like it. So I always make it to that measurement where I've got a good sort of 32 centimeters across the body panels. And then, so it's about 15 centimeters on the front overlaps, and it just makes it nice and comfortable for me. So 32 centimeters, that is about 13 inches that way, and it fits nicely, but also it sort of overfits. And as you could see before, it fitted the mannequin perfectly as well. And this is a size 6, so a UK Australian size 6, which I'm pretty sure is a US size 2, I think. Check your sizings. Sizes are funny. Measurements are set in stone. Sizing sort of moves and ebbs and flows. But this is a size 6 mannequin. So also, this is the yukata that I made from Japanese Kimono fabric. This is Japanese cotton that I've hand sewn myself. This is it on the mannequin. So this is what I wore during a lot of the construction process of this garment. And that's what it looks like on the mannequin as well. So a size 6. And it fits me. I am not a size 6, as you can see. I'm not the slimmest man, but this is a very slim mannequin, and it fits that as well with no real tucking or anything like that. It just sort of, because it wraps around, this garment wraps around. Very, very versatile. So much fun to sew. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it, especially people making masculine garments. A lot of people have been asking me, how do you make a men's yukata? This is how. It is so similar to making the other yukatas and kimonos in the feminine style. The difference being that here is closed. Here, let me show you. So it's closed all the way up. Remember, we left like a little 1 centimeter gap in there, and that's imperceptible. Like, you can't even feel it. But that's the biggest difference. And of course, the sleeve is shorter. And you can make this shorter again. This is a lovely length though, and it's closed to the side of the body. You see there? That's the seam there. And then it's how you wear them. So men, you wear your sash around the hips. I've worn mine a little bit up because my hips are actually really large. So to get this belt to sort of tie and feel nice, I sort of wear it up a bit further. I think Japanese men wear it around like here, and then I just wear it up a bit higher. If I had a longer belt, I'd wear it in the right place. But you wear it down around here, so over the top of your backside and under your belly. Beautiful garment. I'm so happy with this. It is hot. There is I don't know if you can see behind me, there's a giant tropical thunderstorm coming through, and I am comfortable as anything. No air conditioning on or anything. And it feels really nice. So it's a lovely light material. If you're going to get something like this, a satin backed crepe, know that it will be harder to sew just because they move around. So you might need to pin more, or just be ready for it to slip a bit. But it still comes in and makes a lovely straight garment. I hope you like watching. Go and grab the pattern. Make sure you subscribe as well down below, so you can see more of this content. I'm putting out more patterns all the time. I'm constantly making patterns and making more videos, so there's always things happening in the world of Kimono Alex. That's me. So come along, give us a follow, give us a like, and I'll see you in the next video.